Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you have the next 30 minutes or so free because there's a lot of poker to go over. Right, so currently reporting from some hillside in Yucaipa, California. Quite a beautiful city, if you ask me. This is about 15 minutes from where I live. The reason I'm here is because my local gym is here, so I'm here like 3 or 4 times a week, and I figured it's a good spot to recap the previous week for me in terms of poker. And by that, I'm referring to the 3 days I played at the Bicycle Casino live stream, live at the bike. But before we get into those hands, I wanted to share something with you guys real quick. And that is that this upcoming weekend, I'll be going to Las Vegas for Psycho, which is an event held in Vegas every year. And if you guys haven't heard of it, it's a heavy metal music festival. It's a 3-day thing, I believe, could be 4. Don't quote me on that. But they invited me to come out and go check out some of the bands and also play poker at Resorts World, which is the venue where it's being held. They're associated with the poker room in some fashion. They're gonna have like a celebratory poker day. That's gonna be on Saturday, August 20th. If you guys are interested in that, feel free to come out and say what's up. Maybe we could exchange some chips and whatnot. So yeah, that next video is gonna be showcasing that event and of course the interesting hands that I play during that session. But anyway, that's it for now. Let's get into the poker hands for live at the bike. All right, guys, here we go again. This time summarizing 3 days of 25-50, often 25-50, 100, no limit. And the first day, I sit down with $30,000, and we're going to jump straight into an interesting hand early in the day. There's an open from early position to 150 from AJ, 2 callers, and then I look down at ace-jack offsuit on the dealer button. Often a hand that could go either way between calling or re-raising. Given that there's a few callers in the field, I think re-raising has some merit as there's more money to win if we take it down pre-flop. So that's what I decided to do this time, bumping it up to $900. Action gets back to AJ, and after some thought, he decides to call, and Crystals calls as well. So 3 of us go into a flop, which comes pretty good for my exact hand. It's king, king, queen with 2 spades. I've got a straight draw, backdoor nut flush draw with the ace of spades, and it's also just a board that's going to favor me heavily in this situation. So for that reason, when it checks to me, I continue with a small bet of $800. AJ makes the call, and Crystals gets out of the way. So only 2 of us going to a turn, which is the 4 of clubs. Pretty much a blank, shouldn't change anything. So when he checks, I think continuing to bet is the best course of action, especially considering that I could be doing this with hands like ace-king, pocket queens. You guys get the idea, just good hands in general. So when he checks this time, I elect on a size of right around half pot, $2,400. Action's back on him now, and it seems he's got a tough decision with ace-queen. At this point, I do think he has a queen, most likely. Maybe once in a while he could be getting sneaky with a king, but I think it's clear that he's got a hand he's not too comfortable with, so I'm planning on going all in on a few different river cards, depends which one it is, but that's if he makes the call. Let's see if we come to that in the first place. And it turns out that's exactly what happens. AJ thinks it over once again and puts in the money. So we're looking for some help or just a river that we can go all in on credibly. And that's exactly what we get. It's the 10 of diamonds. So now it's not going to be a bluff as I river the nut straight. I guess sometimes we'll be running into a full house that plays in a very trappy fashion, but for the most part, we're going to have the best hand. So when he checks, I'm sticking to the plan of going all in. Only difference now is we're hoping to get called. Let's see what happens.
There's the mash of the all-in button. And AJ, whose strength is to be sticky, now does it turn into a weakness? Can AJ figure this one out? Does he believe Mariano?
After much deliberation, AJ finally decides to call. That's going to be good news. I turn it over, and sure enough, we win a very big pot to start off the week. Nice. In the next hand, there's an open from late position to 150, and I look down at pocket eights next to act. Good candidate to call or re-raise with. This time, I choose the aggressive option, trying to get heads up in position, make it $500 to go. Dr. H cold calls in the small blind, and the original raiser calls as well. So 3 of us go into a flop, which comes 9-6-3. Pretty good board for pocket eights. They both check it over to me, and I think you can make a case for checking back since this board isn't very good for me, but this time I do decide to bet $500. Dr. H calls and Ling Ling gets out of the way, so we're going to a turn which is a good one. It's the 9 of diamonds pairing the top card. However, I think the best option on this turn once he checks it over to me is to check back. I'd often be doing this with a lot of stronger hands as well as flushes, so that's what I do this time, and we see the deuce of spades on the river. Expecting to have the best hand most of the time now. I guess sometimes he will have hands like pocket tens or jacks that cold call my re-raise pre-flop, but he'll also have a lot of hands that floated on the flop and end up missing or are value betting and I still beat, such as any 6 or pocket 7s, for example. So when he bets $850, less than a third the size of the pot, I call right away. And unfortunately, we're up against pocket jacks. So nice hand, Dr. H. This one is not going our way. In the following hand, I raised to $300 with King, Queen of Spades. $100 straddle was on. There's a call on the button, and now Dr. H re-raises from the small blind to $1,550. Not a huge size, but certainly not too small, so I think folding King, Queen suited is actually probably fine, but I decide to call in position and go to a flop. 9-6-4 with 2 diamonds and 1 spade isn't exactly great for my exact hand, but I'll generally have more strong hands on this board than he will, so when he bets small, I decide to call and try to get creative on certain runouts. The 10 of diamonds gives me a chance to do exactly that, and especially so when he decides to check. My exact hand isn't actually the best to have in this situation in terms of bluffing because I have a king and a queen, and those are normally cards I'd want him to have so that he can fold hands like ace-king or ace-queen or king-queen himself. So for that reason, I think probably we shouldn't really be in this situation to begin with, but now that we're here, bluffing seems like the best option. So that's what I do by putting in $2,400. As you guys can see, my opponent's just got ace high, so can't blame him for folding, and this one ends up working out. Next hand's definitely a strange one, but here we go. There's a limp from early position, and then another one. Before I look down at ace-4 of hearts in late position, good enough for a raise, I think, even against 2 limpers, so I kick it up to $300. Both of the limpers end up making the call, so we're going 3 ways in position to a flop of ace-7-5 with 3 spades. Could go either way here when they check it over to me. I decide to bet small, $400. First player calls, and now the second player also calls. So probably not in great shape now with ace, no kicker, but we get some help on the turn as the 4 of diamonds gives me aces up, aka 2 pair. Now what's weird about this hand is Crystals checks again, I guess that's normal, but now Ling decides to lead out for 1100. Pretty certain this is not a bluff, at least I think in the moment. It would be pretty impossible to be bluffing in this situation, but I guess we are still beating some hands, and even if she does have a straight or a flush, if we end up making a full house on the river, we could win a really big pot. So I end up calling, and Crystals calls as well, so not entirely sure where I stand in the hand, and I'm feeling even less confident when the 10 of spades comes out on the river. So now anyone with a spade is beating my hand, but this time they both check it over to me. Now I wonder if I could turn my hand into a bluff. Seems unlikely anyone would have the king or queen of spades except for me in this situation, but at the same time my hand is fairly decent, so maybe checking back is fine. And how often are we going to get a smaller flush to fold anyways? Seems like people aren't really too interested in folding good hands, so after some thought, I end up just checking back, and somehow we end up winning versus 5-3 and 7-5, so pretty interesting flop, and we turn 2 pair versus a worse 2 pair. The river kills all the action, and yeah, we end up winning, but definitely a head scratcher. In the next hand, I look down at ace queen of clubs in the small blind. Action folds all the way to me. I raise it up to $400 and only TKC calls from the $100 blind. So heads up to a flop, which is almost too good to be true. It's king queen 4 with 2 clubs. So good board for me in general, and also in this exact instance, as I've got middle pair top kicker and the nut flush draw. I bet $250 and my opponent calls. Turn is the deuce of diamonds, and now with middle pair, I think the best play is to check and see what he wants to do. So that's what I do. What he wants to do is bet $600. Not really sure if a raise accomplishes much, so I just call, and we see the 8 of clubs on the river. I had a suspicion that I had the best hand all along, but now that's obviously confirmed. And even though I did think he was bluffing on the turn, now obviously I'm crossing my fingers that he's got a good hand. I check it again, and I'm happy to see my opponent bets $1,400. As you guys can see on the screen, he's just got a missed straight draw with Jack 9. But in the moment, I'm thinking he's either got a bluff, which is not going to call any sort of raise, or he's got a very good hand such as a set or perhaps even a flush himself. And those hands are probably going to call a really big bet at this point since it doesn't look like I have much. Probably turning hands like ace-jack with the ace of clubs into a bluff, for example. So after some thought, I decided the best option is to go all in. Sadly, he folds right away, but still always nice to make the nuts. A few rounds later, this hand comes up where Andy opens to 200 from the hijack, and then Ling Ling re-raises the button to 700. I'm next to act in the small blind looking down at ace-king. Very powerful cards, you might say, so I'm going to be putting in a raise of my own. Kick it up to $2,000. Andy folds, but Ling Ling makes the call, so we're going to go heads up out of position to a very nice flop of ace, king, jack with 2 spades. Obviously, we have a very nice hand with top 2 pair, but I do have some concern about hands like pocket jacks or queen 10 suited, for example. But that's not going to alter the course of action here. Continue with a small bet, just like I would with all my hands. She makes the call. Turn is the 9 of diamonds, and since we have an ace and a king, seems more likely that she doesn't have much, or she's got pocket jacks. So for that reason, I think checking makes the most sense now. That's what I do, and she decides to check it back. The river eliminates any sort of worries about possibly being beat, as it comes the ace of diamonds, giving me the best possible hand once again. Ace is full of kings, but given how the hand's played out, I think it makes the most sense to check again. The reason I say that is I still think she's got either a very good hand that could be trapping, like pocket jacks, or perhaps an ace herself that will now go for value, or just a missed draw like any sort of spades or missed straight draw, for example. I did bet pretty small on the flop, so I wouldn't be surprised if she floated with some speculative hands. So after thinking all that over, I think there's more value in checking than there is in betting. That's what I do. Now it's on her. About a minute goes by. She thinks over her options and ends up checking. Unfortunate, but it was a wise check, obviously. We do end up winning, but not the biggest pot ever. Still, always feels great to make a full house. You guys know how that is. And with that, we move to some interesting hands that happened after the stream. These were filmed with my camera as the Live at the Buy cameras were shut off. So here we go. In this one, there's a $200 straddle on, and I look down at Jack 5 of spades in late position. Very questionable whether or not we should be playing this hand, but I do decide to raise it up this time, make it $600, and only the button calls. This player is Crystals. She moved over from one end to the table to the other at this point. We're going heads up to a flop of King 10 deuce with 2 hearts, 1 spade. Generally a board that will favor me a little bit more, I think, so I decide to bet $450, and after some thought, she makes the call. Not looking too good, but the turn is the ace of diamonds, a very good card for me, I think, and one that I don't think she'll be connecting with too often. Obviously, she could have hands like ace 10 or queen jack, but that seems really unlikely, so I decide to continue applying pressure, this time sizing up to 2,300. Unfortunately, she makes the call rather quickly, so things are not looking good, and we get no help on the river as the 7 of clubs appears. Now she's got around $8,000 behind, so a little over pot, and we have an option between either checking and giving up, or going for gusto and jamming all in. Both options don't seem great, if I'm being honest. That's usually the result of playing a marginal hand like this, but we've arrived at this point, and we have to make the best decision. In my opinion, I think the best decision is to go all in, because I could have very strong hands, and queen jack seems unlikely since, I've got a jack, and who knows, she might have raised on the flop or turn with that hand, so Unless she's got two pair, I expect this will work fairly often. I'm all in, and luckily we don't get snap called, so that's always nice. But she doesn't fold either, and time seems to move so slow in these situations. She thinks it over, and then eventually decides to fold. So that's very good news. Could have been a disaster for myself, and despite this one working out, I'm certainly not a huge fan of this hand. With that, we move to the next one where there's a middle position open to $300, and I'm in late position looking down at ace-5 suited. Good candidate to re-raise with, so I make it 1100. Interestingly enough, the big blind cold calls, but the initial raiser folds, so not exactly what I was anticipating, but that's okay. We're off to a flop in position of queen 9-8 with one club. Big blind checks it over to me, and this kind of board is not super good considering the pre-flop action, so I decide to just check it back. And we do get some help on the turn as it comes the 9 of clubs, giving me the nut flush draw. Big blind now bets $800, very small size, so I make the call, and we see the 10 of spades on the river. No help to me. Any jack does now make a straight, but when he bets $400, around 1/10 the size of the pot, I just let it go right away, not expecting to get a fold if I do raise. And sure enough, he shows ace queen. So who knows, maybe we could have gotten away with the raise, but I think it's unlikely I would have a jack very often, and even if I did, this particular player was not in the mood for folding, so yeah, this one doesn't work out, but that's alright. I ended up winning around $20,000 in this session, but that was the end of that. Now it's time for day 2, and we're going to start this day off with pocket 10s. In this hand, I raise it up to $300 from early position and get 4 callers, so 5 of us going to a flop, which comes down amazing. It's ace 10-3 with 2 clubs. Very wet board, lots of draws available as well as top pair, so with middle set, I'm definitely going to continue betting. I put in $700, Ling Ling calls on my left with a flush draw, and now Barry check raises to $2,300. Dream situation, of course, with middle set on a board that we're almost always going to have the best hand on. So now we have an option between calling or putting in another raise. Given that Ling Ling called, I think it's clear she's got some sort of draw, and with Barry check raising on an ace-high board, I think he very likely has a strong hand. So throwing theory out the window here a little bit, I decide to put in another raise for value, make it $5,500 to go. Ling Ling folds king deuce of clubs, and now it's back on Barry, who after some deliberation puts in the call. So we're off to a turn, hoping for a clean card. That's not exactly what we get. It's the queen of diamonds. Does introduce some possible straights, as well as, I guess, secondary flush draws if somehow he has diamonds, but for the most part, I think it's not going to change much. He checks it over to me, and I'm definitely going to keep betting. This time I put in $8,000, and much to my surprise, Barry ends up folding ace-3 offsuit. Ace is up, which I think is a ridiculous fold, obviously completely owned me. Very nice hand, Barry, but I gotta be honest, if I was him, I would definitely not fold that one. Nice hand, man. In this next hand, there's a limp from the small blind. $200 straddle is on, and I get dealt queen jack of diamonds in the big blind. Good enough to raise, I think, so I kick it up to 1,000, but unfortunately get called by the middle blind, the straddler, and the limper from the small blind. So not exactly what I was hoping for, but it's alright as we flop top pair on jack 3-3. Small blind checks, and I decide to get a bit sneaky and check. This also helps me be a little less predictable. If I always bet when I have something and check when I don't, that's a recipe for disaster. So I do check it, and action ends up checking to Andy, who bets $1,500. Small blind folds, I call, and Ling Ling folds as well. So just me and Andy going to a turn, which is the king of spades. I check it again. This time he checks it back, and we see the 4 of spades on the river. Absolutely no value in betting here. Makes no sense to bluff either, as we've got a decent hand for showdown. So I check it a third time, and now Andy puts in $2,600. We're beating all possible bluffs, so I call right away, considering that it's not that big of a bet compared to the size of the pot. And he says, you're good. So I turn it over, and we win a decent pot with queen jack. And with that, we move to the last hand of this particular stream, where I'm in the $200 double straddle. Andy opens from late position to 600. Barry calls in the big blind, and I defend with jack 10. Flop is 8-9-6, pretty good for me as I've got an open-ended straight draw to the nuts, and 2 overcards if anyone's got a pair. Action checks around, and we see the 4 of spades on the turn, which shouldn't really change much. Now Barry decides to lead for $1,100. I've seen Barry bet a lot of hands that, in my opinion, don't make a ton of sense, such as middle pair or bottom pair. Sometimes, obviously, he'll have top pair or good hands, but considering that he bets a lot of hands that aren't necessarily strong, I think bluffing with Jack-10 makes a lot of sense. A Jack or a 10 could easily improve us to the best hand, and we have some removal to 10-7, which is the nut straight. So with that in mind, I kick it up to $3,300. I've also got a good image to do this, I think. I've turned over good hands and haven't played a ton of big pots this stream, so I put in the raise, Andy folds, and now it gets back to Barry. He thinks it over for a bit and calls, so that's not good news. Looking for some help on the river, which does not come. It's a complete blank, the ace of clubs. Barry checks it over to me again, and now it's just a question of whether we want to give up or continue bluffing. And I think you guys know the answer. He could certainly have hands like a 9 or an 8 with a straight draw that missed. All sorts of hands that aren't going to love facing a big bet here. And if I did have a really strong hand, I would certainly be betting big, so that's the plan with Jack high. Pot is around $8,500. I elect on a size of $8,000, right around pot sized. Unfortunately, as you guys can see, Barry's got a set, so he's probably not looking to fold that. And sure enough, he tosses in the call without thinking it over too long. That's a good call, Barry. You win. And just like that, we lose a very big pot to end the stream. Unfortunately, this took the wind out of my sails, and the game broke shortly after, so I ended up losing around $10,000 on this particular day. But that's okay, as we have one more stream to go. So fast forward 24 hours to this hand where I have 7-5 of clubs. Today we're playing 25, 50, 100. The straddle is permanent. I kick it up to $300 and get called by the big blind and the straddler. Flop comes out Queen 9-8 with 1 club. Not really too good for me, so I decide to check it back, and we get some help on the turn as the 4 of clubs comes out, giving me additional outs to a flush as well as a straight draw. So when they check it over to me, I decide to size up to $1,500. I think doing this makes a lot of sense with good and bad hands. In my exact case, I've got 7 high, so I could certainly use some folds. But that's not what happens, is Ludo makes the call, and Edgar gets out of the way. So going heads up to a river, which is amazing. The Queen of Clubs. Not only do we have a flush, but I do think it's very likely he's got a queen after checking twice and calling a big bet on the turn. So it's just a question of how big do we want to bet. My opponent's got around twice the size of the pot, $8,000 remaining into a $4,000 pot. And the question is, how big would we bet if we had a bluff, such as 4 or 5 of diamonds, or perhaps 6, 7 suited? You guys get the idea. And I think the answer is all of it. If we bet this river, we're pretty much saying we have a very strong hand or nothing at all. So having a lot of bluffs available, and also saying that, like I said, it's either a very good or very bad hand, all in seems to make the most sense, so that's what I decided to do. As you guys can see, Ludo had the nut flush draw, diamonds, and he's not going to call with ace high, so we take it down, and we're off to a decent start. Unfortunately, for the rest of this stream, I picked up pretty much nothing playable. I was very card dead, and really didn't get into many interesting situations, but this was one other hand that I found noteworthy. There's a raise from TKC to $300, and I'm next to act with ace king. I make it 1,000 to go, and after some thought, he makes the call. We go heads up to a flop of 10-8 deuce with 2 hearts. Not much going on for me, but I do have the ace of hearts and 2 overs, so when he checks, I decide to bet. On this exact board, I think betting small would be a mistake, although I know a lot of people are addicted to down betting these days. I think betting pot makes more sense on this kind of texture, so that's what I do, making it $2,200 to go. And after some thought, TKC makes the call. As you guys can tell, he's got a very nice hand with a pair and a flush draw. Turn card is the 5 of spades. He checks again, and now I think checking back is the very clear way to go, so that's what I do. But we get some help on the river. It's the King of Hearts. Pretty good card for me, as I've got top pair, and I think it's unlikely he'll have a flush very often since he just called on the flop and he checks it over to me on the river. So after a few seconds of deliberation, I decide to bet. If I had a hand like ace queen or ace jack, half pot would be the magic number, so with a good hand, that's what I decide to do. As you guys can see, this is not a good situation as my opponent has rivered a flush, but much to my surprise, he ends up just calling, so I think I have the best hand when that happens, but unfortunately he turns over the winner. Luckily, he did not check raise all in, which I think would have been a very viable option for him, especially since he could turn a lot of hands into bluffs. Luckily, we don't have to come to that, since I might have called having the ace of hearts, but unfortunately we do end up losing a sizable pot here. So yeah, like I said, not a lot of interesting hands on stream, but we do have one more hand left. This one happened after the stream, so going back to my point of view for this one, there's a button open to $300, and I call in the straddle with 10-9 of clubs. Flop comes ace king 10 with 1 club. I check it over to him, but he checks it back. Turn is the 7 of clubs, so now we've got a flush draw to go along with our third pair. I check it again, and this time he bets $400. Not really sure if raising makes a lot of sense, although I don't hate the idea of doing that. I end up just deciding to call, and we get some help on the river, but not entirely what I was expecting. It's the 9 of diamonds, so we get a disguised 2 pair. I check it again, and this time he bets $1,600, right around the size of the pot. Well, seems like no real options here aside from calling. Raising seems a little bit too thin, and folding is out of the question now that we've got 2 pairs, so I put in the money, and we beat ace deuce offsuit. So this one goes our way, and we take down a decent little pot before calling it a night. I did win a few other hands post-stream. Unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to record them, but after catching up from some losses during the stream, I ended up losing around $1,000 on this particular day, so a whole lot of nothing, really. Anyway, that brings an end to 3 days worth of hands. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed. Right, so as you guys saw, not a whole lot of great things happened, but also nothing too terrible happened. In the end, I ended up winning around maybe $5,000 across the 3 days, which is certainly not a bad result, but of course it could have been a lot better when you consider how big the games were. However, given how the last month went for me, I'm more than happy with it, and maybe this is a turnaround point where things start going a little bit better. I'll also be playing on Hustler September 1st and 2nd, so those are my next big games coming up. Feel free to tune in and watch. And yeah, before we sign off today, I wanted to go over a few quick things that I get asked a lot down there in the comments section, so I wanted to clear this up. Number one is, as far as taking money to and from the casino for these games, obviously it's a large sum of money. I never have any cash on me. I always do either a cashier's check or a wire transfer. In this case, I have a player's bank at the Bicycle Casino, which means that they have a credit for me, or rather a balance, and I just deposit and withdraw from them directly. Much safer than having cash on you for obvious reasons. And the second thing is, anytime I play these games, or really in general, I don't sell or swap action. I always have 100% of myself. So for those of you guys wondering, that's, hang on, the police coming after me, I think. Okay, I think we're in the clear. Yeah, for those of you guys wondering, I don't really sell action. I obviously wish I did the last month since I lost 200K, but yeah, I just prefer to always have my own action and live with the consequences. But anyway, that's it for today, guys. Don't forget about Psycho next weekend and coming out to Resorts World Poker Room on Saturday the 20th. Hopefully I see at least a few of you guys there. And if not, stay tuned for the next vlog where I'm going to summarize all that. That's it for today. As always, thank you guys for watching. I'm going to head to the gym. Until next time, good luck at the tables. Peace.